don't do unto others what you do not want others do unto you. China is on the upper stream. That's a reality. And I do not want to see India in the midstream doing funny things against the people in Pakistan.
Mr. Gao is saying that, it is our water. We should say, sorry, it was a Tibetan water, still is a Tibetan water. That's where Tibetans live. Now the Chinese government will come with their Dalai Lama, will be recognized, endorsed by fake Panchen Lama.
Yeah,
Will endorse
they already have a
Dalai
Panchen Lama, yes.
Right? So it's a fake plus fake. It still is fake. It is for His Holiness the Dalai Lama to decide on his reincarnation, where he'll be born and when he'll be born.
China has become a real problem for India when it comes to the geopolitics of not just the region, but how India is looking at terrorism emanating from Pakistan. How can we tackle it? To discuss this and more when it comes to a region that has suffered at the hands of China as well, I'm being joined by Dr. Lobsang Sangay. He is former Prime Minister of the Tibetan Government-in-Exile. The Government-in-Exile works out of Dharamshala here in India. Dr. Sangay, thank you so much for joining us here again on the India Today Network. Let's begin with the fact that you've been traveling, you've been engaging the United States of America, and now we're looking at China being more assertive, more aggressive. You just paid a visit to His Holiness the Dalai Lama as well. Do you see a change when it comes to how America views the issue of Tibet?
In the first the term of the President Trump, we passed the Tibetan Policy Support Act 2020. And that was, the politically speaking, the biggest act, and all the things that we needed, on reincarnation and U.S. government dialogue, everything was included in that. So it was signed by President Trump. In that sense, I think his views and stand on Tibet is consistent. But then there has been, generally, a lot of changes with the shutting down, more or less, of USAID.
That's true.
Voice of America, Radio Free Asia. It affected Tibetan programs and, aid for Tibetans as well. Otherwise, Tibet has always been a bipartisan issue.
Okay, in terms of the issue of Tibet itself, where is the government in exile? Where does it stand? Where does His Holiness the Dalai Lama stand? And how far are you willing to engage Beijing?
No, His Holiness the Dalai Lama has always maintained we must find a middle ground, which is, China says sovereignty and territorial integrity cannot be compromised. And His Holiness thinks the repression and sufferings of the Tibetans cannot continue. So let's come to the middle. And he proposed that, if Tibetans are granted genuine autonomy within the framework of the Chinese constitution, then we will not seek separation from China. So that has been on the table for the last 40 years now. And unfortunately, we have had envoys with the Dalai Lama, visiting China and meeting their counterparts, and few places in Tibet as well. But His Holiness, kind and reasonable gesture has not been reciprocated in kind.
Right. For us here in India, Dr. Sangay, the problem is the fact that we wouldn't have had a border with China if Tibet were independent. But we do have a border with China. I had a guest with me not so long ago, Victor Gao, who is very well known as the interpreter for Deng Xiaoping. Knows China, is really in the thick of things, member of the party, so on and so forth. He dared India by saying that if you do anything to the Indus Waters Treaty, if you stop water to Pakistan, which is a huge thing for us because it's a policy decision that India has taken after the terror attacks, and we will talk about the terror attacks. He said that don't forget that all these waters originate in Tibet, China's Tibet. And so China can do to India what India does to Pakistan.
Yeah, I think Dr. Gao, is threatening. But the fact that you're right, for thousands of years, there was never a land border between India and China. It was always been between Tibet and India. In fact, the finance minister of Tibet wrote a letter to the government of India when Chinese army was invading. He said, by the way, between the border of India and China, especially in the Arunachal side, we have only 80 border guards. If India doesn't help Tibet now, India will pay much more heavier price. Now I think India has, not 80, not 8,000, not 80,000, maybe even, few 100,000 soldiers guarding the border, And also, even today, there is something called Indo-Tibet Border Police on the Indian side, which in a way recognizes the historical fact that the border was with Tibet. And also the Chief Minister of Arunachal Pradesh, Honorable Pema Khanduji, a friend of mine, whom you know, when the media asks him about Indo-China border, he says, by the way, we never had Indo-China border. It's always been an Indo-Tibet border. Right? So Mr. Gao is totally wrong on this. Now, as far as water is concerned, yes, Tibet is the roof of the world and has 40,000 glaciers, and 6 of the 10 major rivers of Asia flow from Tibet. And as a Tibetan and a Buddhist in the land of Lamas, we've been very generous in the sense we respected nature, we respected the natural flow of rivers. So the cradle of Chinese civilization, right?
Yes.
It's in Yellow River and Yangtze River, right? They flow from Tibet. Irrawaddy, Brahmaputra, Mekong River, all flow from Tibet, and
The whole of Indus.
And Indus and Satluj, also the term India came from Indus, right?
Yes.
So all flow from Tibet. So if Mr. Gao is saying that it is our water, we should say sorry. It was a Tibetan water, still is a Tibetan water. That's where Tibetans live, And unfortunately, China has not signed the UN Convention on Water Sharing.
Yes.
Right? So, and then they have built over 400 dams all over the Tibetan region to generate energy. Tibetans don't need any additional energy because we have surplus of energy.
Yeah.
But they're building more dams because they need for AI, for data centers, you need lots of energy. And Tibetan water and rivers are exploited by the Chinese government. So, when Chinese government says, our products are so cheap, it is produced with the help of energy of Tibetan rivers. It is produced with the help of Tibetan critical minerals like lithium and copper and gold and uranium, you name it, and also produced with the help of 90% of rare earth, Inner Mongolia.
That's true. So, if Tibet were an autonomous region and recognized and respected as such, would then the Tibetan government have had more say in how the water is shared and where does the water go? Or is it still going to be a sovereign issue of Beijing?
As per the UN, conventions, local people have lots of rights. First of all, you have to respect nature, and it has to be culturally sensitive and economically beneficial to the local people. And at the moment, exploitation of all these minerals, with the help of, by the way, Western companies, though, most of the know-how and machines are used and invested by Western companies with the Chinese government and Chinese companies. They disregard the UN Convention on Water Sharing. Tibetans don't benefit. For example, lithium. is exploited. And it's a very complicated, polluting kind of process, because you have to extract lithium using hot water and separate, right? And then it pollutes the soil and water, and lots of fishes die, right? And then also the air. The Chinese government is exploiting lithium. 75% of lithium reserve of China is in Tibet. So Mr. Gao should respond to this issue that you are exploiting Tibetan lithium.
And who benefits out of it?
Chinese companies and the investors,
Not Tibetans
not
at all.
In fact, there is a photograph of people protesting because their rivers were getting polluted. A lot of fish were dying in Tao region. They came out and protested. Despite all the protests, Chinese government is disregarding it
And continued.
continuing to generate power for their benefit, right? So they are doing it in utter disregard. So hence, Mr. Gao and the Chinese government has lesser credibility and legitimacy to speak about Tibetan water and critical mineral resources of Tibet.
Okay, let's talk about the Pahalgam terror attack, one of the worst attacks we've seen in recent times in India, where people were killed on the basis of religion. What do you make of how China has come out and blindly is supporting Pakistan, irrespective of the proof that has been given on Lashkar's involvement in the attack?
I felt the timing was a bit suspicious. Because if you recall, when Russia invaded Ukraine, President Putin went to China and signed this, all-weather treaty of friendship, right? And then 2 days later, after the Winter Olympics, the invasion happened. It's as though you sign an agreement and you also agree with the timing.
Yeah.
And
Saying that don't do anything during the Olympics.
don't disrupt it. Let's
Yeah.
have a closing ceremony, medal, get all the coverage, and after 2 days you can do whatever you want. Similarly, with all this tariff war that was going on, and U.S. imposed 140 plus percent tariff on China, they faced the highest tariff, and there were few countries which had lesser percentage of tariff, but India was among the lesser group.
Yes.
And I know the Indian Commerce Minister and their counterpart were meeting in Washington D.C. and there was talk as that they
For
could
a
get
trade deal.
package.
Yes.
And when the Pahalgam happened, with the U.S. Vice President in town, and then we must remember the Doklam and also the Galwan happened when Xi Jinping was in India, or Modi
Or
was meeting
in
Xi
Wuhan,
Jinping somewhere
yes,
else.
yes.
See, so these are, not just coincidence. I think, we must know it's like it's psychological war, right? So, Vice J.D. Vance was here, and package deal was going on, and India got distracted. Then you have to have this, propaganda or media narrative control, all that, and suddenly, U.S. said, okay, we'll lower tariff with China and we'll talk to them. And then the big package that India was supposed to get, which was
Has been delayed.
has been delayed now,
Because
So-
they're in talks with Beijing now.
Yeah. So
Very interesting.
I found the tariff, this Pahalgam helped China quite a bit.
That's a very interesting take on how two friends come together at a real cost for a third country like India. But are you seeing a change in the
My
world
point
order?
also is, for Pakistan to make such kind of bold move on India, I'm sure they want to do it, right? But they have to go and consult their biggest ally and say,
Yeah.
and then
Is this the right time?
is the right time, right? So that's, I found it very, interesting actually. Yeah.
That's actually putting it in a very different way now. Looking at it through this prism is going to be very interesting. But has the world order changed in many ways? Because nobody's listening to America like they used to. And the United Nations is certainly losing teeth. Look, Pakistan is going to head the Taliban committee at the United Nations Security Council. They're going to hold presidency for the month of July. The world order certainly seems a little skewed when it comes to the real fighting for the real causes, like fighting against terrorism?
You know, the global south, and north divide has become more ideological. And then global south are in a way forced to, bond and defend
Yes.
not their rights, but to counter whatever the North is trying to do or the West is trying to do. So that's why, even at the UN, as you said, Taliban Committee or the presidency, even the Human Rights Committee,
Yes.
drafting of the Human Rights Committee was chaired by Russian expert with the help of China, So you can clearly see, and even there was a crime against, some say genocide, some say crime against humanity, against Uyghur people. UN Human Rights Commissioner came out with a report and tabled it. And how many countries supported it? Only 50 countries. 150 plus countries, including the Arab countries, which they are so much
Islamic countries,
Muslim,
yes.
That Uyghurs, their mosques are bombarded, their practice of Islam is banned and discouraged by the Chinese government. And I remember once, Imran Khan was talking about Kashmir, and he was asked, okay, what about Uyghur people? They are also, Muslim, they practice Islam and all this.
He feigned ignorance.
He just said, I don't know this issue very well.
Yeah. We remember that.
Yes.
If
So, you just feel, and then the incapability or ineffectiveness of United Nations. Even the Ukraine war, they just can't prevent it. For Tibetans, we've been saying this for 60 years.
Gaza,
yes. For 60 years, we've been saying, we cannot even table a resolution on human rights in Tibet, basic human rights in Tibet, at the UN Human Rights Commission. We will lose by supermajority because the global south, they're not there to defend human rights. They are bonding together to counter West.
Yes.
In the process, and
many smaller countries lose out.
Lose out, yes.
Yeah, it is unfair.
And the Chinese government is, using it quite
as
effectively
leverage
to their benefit.
But is it ideological, Dr. Sangay, or is it more to do with countries becoming transactional? That your problem is not my problem if this country is going to help me with this?
Ideological in the sense, not based on morality and justice. Ideological in the sense that, let's bond together. Now,
because we need to counter the West.
So the strategy seems to be Chinese government is saying, look, don't do business with China, and don't do business with America or West, and don't defend them. But China is the largest business partner with all the Western countries, but then come and tell global south, let's bond together, and you should not do business with the West, but I will be the biggest business partner of the West.
You also represented the Tibetan Government-in-Exile. Talking about Tibet and the projects that you just mentioned, how much of a concern, because a lot of people in India also try to downplay the concern, saying that what China is doing or is capable of doing should not scare India. But should India be worried about the building of projects on the bend? And how much of a worry should it be for India?
Should be very worried, because...
Explain it to our viewers, yes, what it really is.
As per the Chinese government report, right, they want to build 12 dams over Brahmaputra river. And the largest one will be at the bend of Arunachal Pradesh. They say that it will be larger than Three Gorges Dam. Three Gorges Dam is the biggest dam in the whole world. So if they built it, what you do is you control the flow of water. Number one, agriculture is a seasonal. Right? If you don't get water on time, you lose out on farming.
Yes.
And you can weaponize it during war if you flood, right? If you let the water flow and you can flood everything downstream, you can wipe out highways and railways.
So it's not going to be a run of the river. It is going to be a proper dam with reservoir to store water.
Yes, bigger than Gorges Dam. Then they have already built 4 dams already. Now they're building the biggest one. So they can weaponize it, So that way, India should be very worried, and including Bangladesh also, because
Yes.
Brahmaputra is a lifeline for Assam and
Yes.
Bangladesh and all the countries downstream.
Some of them argue that the Brahmaputra water does not actually come from China or Tibet, particularly, but that 70% of the water is monsoon-fed rainwater. Does that mean that China has no control, or it still can control water at times when there are no monsoons?
You know, I've seen this, reasoning, but I just feel like, you're just, because you're helpless and you come up with excuse to do nothing.
Yeah.
Scientifically, what happens if you build such a big dam? You control the flow of, water. Then the mist is formed.
So you impact monsoons.
Then it
Yeah.
becomes cloud, and there will be a rain. Rain will be on the other side. If there's lesser water downstream, mist has to be formed into cloud and rain, right? So automatically you can say 40% or 60% of Brahmaputra is
But it'll
monsoon related.
shift.
It will shift because I live in Dharamsala. Because of Pong Dam, there is more rainfall in McLeodganj than
Than
in
in
Lower
the-
Dharamsala.
yes.
Because the mist is formed, it forms cloud and hits the the mountains.
The mountains.
And the rain falls. Right? So you can clearly see till the Pong Dam was built, there was less rain in McLeodganj.
What should India do?
Now,
We've already recognized Tibet as the autonomous region of China. What can India do at this point in time,
the historical,
where China has become a real problem for India?
the historical mistakes were made, right? But even the US has, looked back, and in recent years, when the US Tibetan Policy Support Act was passed, after that, US corrected its measures because each time State Department, White House used to issue a statement, they always start with Tibet has been part of China, or US recognizes Tibet as part of China,
Yes.
but they deserve human rights and all that.
Yes.
Now that language is removed. The State Department does not issue statements saying Tibet, is part of China. They've taken it out. And recently we passed a law by saying historically Tibetans claim Tibet to be independent. So it's not necessarily recognition but acknowledgement. So law has been passed by America. So India could do the same. India has been a witness. There are so many, in fact, treaties, right? The similar agreement between India and Tibet of 1914. There are other agreements between Ladakh and Tibet, and Sikkim and Tibet. India has evidence, historical witnesses throughout this, Himalayan belt, to say that yes, Tibet was historically, there were trade routes. In fact, we have some photographs where the road signs says the border of Tibet, 22 kilometers away,
Yes.
So you have physical evidence, and Indian government could recognize, Tibetan Government-in-Exile. The Tibetan Policy Support Act 2020 also recognized and acknowledged Central Tibetan Administration as the representative of the Tibetan people in exile, and Sikyong, my position at that time, is the president of CTA. So, America has taken, actions, and so can India.
Can India do it? At this point in time, with China being so assertive and aggressive and economically so powerful, can India really do it?
Yes.
Or should India do it?
India can, India should. You are dealing with the expansionist power. No matter what you do or say, China is going to do what it wants to do. Has formed, all-weather friendship with Pakistan, and interfering in Bangladesh and Sri Lanka and Maldives, Nepal too, right? So India didn't take action on Tibet, but China, is doing what it wants to do. And then being an expansionist, they have, in fact, there was a violence.
And
in
they control the waters.
Yeah, Galwan and Doklam and all that, right? So India's choice either take action, or if you don't take any action, Chinese government will be generous and look other way. 60 years is, clear evidence that China is an expansionist country, and it will keep expanding no matter what you do or say. So it's better to stand up and do something and say something.
Recognize Tibet?
recognize
Do you
Tibet.
recognize Tibet as an autonomous region of China
Yes.
and recognize the government in exile?
Yes, and in fact, if you recognize first Simla Agreement of 1914 between British India and Tibet, in Tibet, that demarcates the border between India and
India
Tibet,
and
the
Tibet.
McMahon line.
Yeah.
The whole of Arunachal, whether Tawang belongs to China or not, whether Tawang, that area, is southern Tibet or not, was clearly decided in 1914 by Tibet.
Yes.
Now, if India is saying, oh, that is the border and Tawang is part of India, and that's the only treaty or the agreement you have. So now, if you don't recognize that, then that's why I always tell media people, when they say, oh, why are Chinese, soldiers are in Galwan and Doklam? Because if you keep saying Indo-China border, if you ask Chinese soldiers, why are you here? Because you say it's China's border, I'm here. Then so why are you here? Because this is our border. Then they enter into Galwan and Doklam and all other areas.
They don't have a right to enter these areas because they don't own it.
So if it's Tibet, then who has right to say what is the demarcation? Then the Tibetan Government-in-Exile has ruled. Tibetan leaders have ruled, right? So India has a choice to give voice or recognize the voice of the Tibetans.
His Holiness the Dalai Lama is turning 90, Dr. Sangay, and it's an important date. We wish him all the health and life, but there's always going to be a conversation about who next and what is China going to do about it. You met him recently.
Yeah. Just 3 days ago, I had an audience, and I wished him well and live long. And he said, "Yes, I'm going to live, beyond 113." And that when he said that, I felt he has the determination, the spirit to live long, which bodes well for Tibetans, and for the whole world as well, because he is a guru and compassion on kindness.
And in many ways, the last man standing when it comes to Tibet.
Yes, to some extent, because he does believe that Tibetan people should take forward the Tibetan movement. And then, yes, he is synonymous with Tibet and the Tibetan movement, the brand, the name recognition, and all that. So we hope, we pray and we believe that he will live long. And then he's going to celebrate 90th birthday next month. And then the Chinese government is already making plans, and they have declared so Wang Huning, the number 4 leader of China, who is also the propaganda czar, inaugurated a museum on the reincarnation of Dalai Lama in Beijing, physical building with exhibition. And they are coming out with documentaries, and they have a huge, rich CCTV, Xinhua News Agency, and CGTN, right, Chinese Government Television Network, all over the world. And so they have huge plans, and we see indications of that. So we have to counter the narrative, at least to some extent, control the narrative. But the narrative is very simple. It is for His Holiness the Dalai Lama to decide on his reincarnation, where he'll be born and when he'll be born. It's his prerogative, right?
Yeah.
Because it is Dalai Lama's reincarnation. It's his choice.
Are we going to see 2 of them then? One that would be decided by the disciples once the Dalai Lama tells exactly where and what and how the reincarnate would be born. And the second that Beijing will decide.
They will try. So that's why in the latest book by His Holiness, Voice for the Voiceless, he clearly stated that he will be born outside of China. He'll be born in free country. So clearly, his desire, it's his reincarnation, right? It's reincarnation, right? So he will be born outside. Now that way, he has made his statement or preference very clear. Now the Chinese government will come with their Dalai Lama, will be recognized, endorsed by fake Panchen Lama.
Yeah,
Will endorse
they already have a
Dalai
Panchen Lama, yes.
Right? So it's a fake plus fake. Still is fake. So one wish by His Holiness Dalai Lama, right? And and then facilitated by his office, Gandhar Phoran, will be the true one. So because we have, it's not just Dalai Lama, we have several hundreds, some 7,000 reincarnated lamas. So it's reincarnation of those individuals are their personal choice, and His Holiness Dalai Lama makes it clear. And also, Chinese government, what credibility do they have? They discredited His Holiness Dalai Lama throughout his life.
Yes.
Called him wolf in sheep's clothing and all kinds of
whatnot,
names,
yes.
right? But then saying, next one, we will recognize. Okay, if you think he's so bad, you have to call him names for 60 plus years.
And now you want one
Yes,
of your own.
that's that's the joke when it happened. That will be the joke of the decade. That we are Communist Party, we are atheists, we don't believe in religion,
But we have a Dalai
we will
Lama.
choose the religious leader, and that will be the authentic one.
Yeah.
It's like
Very interesting.
It's like even let's say Chief Minister of Orissa, right, says, "Oh, I'm a holy man. I'm Hindu. I will choose the next Shankaracharya of Puri temple."
Which is
That's what I'm saying.
unlike, yeah.
Even a Hindu chief minister, a devout, follower of the temple of Shankaracharya, if he acts, that way, followers will not follow
Will not
that.
follow it.
So similarly, if Chinese government says this is the Dalai Lama, it will be a joke, I think. Yeah? But they will try that. But as far as Tibetans are concerned, it's pretty clear. His Holiness decides, and we all will follow. By the way, the reincarnation has a major geopolitical issue because some say 7 to 13% of population in India are Buddhist,
Yes.
and the whole of Himalayan belt has huge following of His Holiness.
Sri Lankans,
Yes.
in Nepal,
Then
there's
you go
so
up,
many,
yeah,
yes.
Nepal, Bhutan,
Bhutan,
and then you go up Tibet,
Yes.
then you go up Inner Mongolia,
Yes.
then you go up Outer Mongolia or
Yes.
Mongolia, then you go up,
yes.
you
There are
have
a lot of,
Tuba and Buret, all the way to Russia.
yes.
And then you go more east, Burma, Laos,
Oh,
Cambodia.
lots.
So geographically, it's, in fact, it will be the biggest territory perhaps in the Asian map. So it has a huge, geopolitical ramification.
Yeah.
Because what you're saying is, if the Chinese government gets away with it,
India has not been able to capitalize on the fact that, the Dalai Lama is here in India, but they've not been able to capitalize on the whole religious aspect of how, it could have done so well for India in all these countries that follow Buddhism.
India has, in a way, on the one hand, very simple or uncomplicated role to play, because what it can say is, like cardinals met, selected the Pope, and India congratulated the new Pope. Similarly, Tibetans, Lamas will
get
come
together.
together and endorse their Lama, and India can say, for 5,000 years, the followers of various religion select their own leader, Shankaracharya and others, and Indian government, whether kings or emperors, never interfered.
No.
Similarly, when it happens with the Tibetans, India can say, this has been our tradition. And
We'll endorse.
and then yes, and also with the Pope, right? And we will continue with the tradition of saying we will respect the wishes and the desire, of the followers.
Very important messaging, not just on Pahalgam, but also on reincarnation. The Chinese government should listen to what Dr. Sangay has been saying. It's not just about the projects that they're building, but also a message to India and what India can do when it comes to geopolitics and how to tackle and face China. Thank you so much, Dr. Sangay, for joining us here on the network. Thank you.